So I'm Filip Ekberg. I am a senior developer at Redify, and I'm here to talk about some Xamarin. So how many of you guys have played with C# before? A couple? That's good. That's kind of a prerequisite to do Xamarin, but we'll get into why you should switch over to C# from whatever you're doing a little bit later. You have my Twitter handle down there and my email, so if you have any questions about C# or about Xamarin, just shoot away any questions. So what is Xamarin? Xamarin enables developers to reach all major mobile platforms. They do this by giving you the possibility to create native user interfaces. And that also means that they can give you native performance. So a couple of years ago, I created mobile applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the first thing that the customer complains about is the performance. Now, this might be my fault, or it's the fact that it's not really running natively on the device that I'm showing them. Another really cool thing is that I have a lot of different devices. I have my Android device, I have my Windows Phone device, and I have a lot of different tablets, and I have a Mac, and I have my PC, and I want everything to run on all these devices without using too much effort to create an application for each device. So what I can do is that I can share all my libraries between the different platforms. Xamarin uses C# and the .NET framework. So the .NET framework is really powerful. It comes with a lot of things that makes all the development much easier. And as you see here on the images at the bottom, you can create applications for iPad, iPhone, Windows Phone, Android devices, all different tablets and all that. So previously, we had a lot of different mobile development approaches, especially for cross-platform. So as I said, I've been doing some development for mobile devices before. I've tried doing iOS stuff natively using Objective-C. I've done some Android stuff using Java and Windows Phone using C#. And everything is just so cumbersome when I need to change the language and change the framework each time. So we have a couple of different approaches when it comes to creating different applications or the same application for different devices. This first approach here is the siloed approach. We create one application for each device. We have the iOS version, which is written in Objective-C. We have the Android version written in Java, and the Windows Phone version written in C#. They all come with their different code bases, and they all come with their different tool sets. I'm used to working in Visual Studio, and when I want to do Android, I have to switch over to Eclipse or something equivalent to that. It also brings on different teams. So we need to have a team that is an expert on writing applications for iOS, and one team that is expert on writing for Android, and this increases the cost of building the application. So how many of you in here go by this approach when you create mobile applications? How about as many of you that know C#? So here's another approach. You write it once, and then just have it run everywhere. Now this sounds really good, but in this case we're using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and some black box to convert this to run natively. The problem with this approach is that we don't really know what the black box is going to give us. We just hope that it's going to work real well on the different devices. And what happens here is that the end users are going to be unhappy because they don't really get what they're expecting. So if I have my iOS version and it's written in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, it might look the same on the Android, but the Android users aren't really familiar with the iOS layout. And this is a problem. It also brings on unhappy developers. So it's not really that fun to work with an application that everyone just hates because it's not really performing that well, or it's hard to maintain. And this also increases the applications that are abandoned. So if you take a look in the app stores, the ones that are just wrappers for HTML and JavaScript versions, they're often abandoned and never updated. Because when they write the applications, they think to themselves that we can just update the website. But the thing is that each time you release an update in the App Store, the user is reminded that your application exists. Now, if you just create a wrapper that connects to a website, and you have the website update on its own without notifying the user that something has changed, so then they never get reminded of your application. That's a different problem. So Xamarin has a quite unique approach to this. It's not really a black box that converts this to whatever it's converting to. It's pretty transparent. So the idea here is that we create one user interface per device. That might sound like a lot of work, but if we really want to have a really greatly performant app, we really want to focus on each platform when it comes to the UI. Now, we can share the core library between all the devices. So I have my business layer, and the same business layer, the same code base, from the same team, runs on all my different devices. So I'm currently developing an application with a friend and colleague. And what we discovered is that most of the code that we want to have inside our app that goes through all the business logic and all the mathematics stuff and all that, it goes into a shared library. And then we just have to create the iOS and Android version and the Windows user interface. And that's really a minimal thing in the app development process. So by going by this approach, I think this mic is lagging. Anyways, sorry?
Very direct, you just go a little bit off.
That makes sense. All right. So this approach helps us get a native user interface. It helps us getting a native performance, and we get a shared core library shared across all the different devices that we target. So we have iOS that includes the iPhone and the iPad. And we have all the different Android devices, such as the Galaxy Tab and the Galaxy phones. And this full API coverage. So I know a lot of you might think that, so we're writing something here with some unknown thing. How do we know what is supported and not? The thing is that they support everything. We'll get to that in just a moment. So why would you use C#? Now, I'm a bit biased on this. I'm a Microsoft C# MVP, and I wrote a book on C#. So why I would use C# is quite expected. I think C# is awesome. And there's a different reason, there are a lot of different reasons to why C# is awesome. One of the first things that I like to talk about is the language integrated queries. It makes it so easy for me to work with collections of data. And I can even parallelize this with built-in functionality and have it run on multiple cores processing my collections. It's so easy to work with XML documents. Coming from Android development, you know that you might have to work with XML documents, and from other mobile platforms as well. And working with events and delegates is really easy as well. And when it comes to C# development, we have a lot of really good IDEs. So we have Visual Studio, which has a great extensibility. So we have tools that you can buy and download for free for Visual Studio that just make the development so easy. So I want to show some differences between coding in C# and coding in Objective-C and Java. So here's an example for attributed strings. So to the left here, we have the Objective-C version. And to the right, we have the equivalent using C# and Xamarin. With C#, we're taking advantage of the built-in stuff in the language. This makes it really easy for us to write really slick and nice code in C#. And when it comes to Android, actually, this is also iOS. In this case, we just have a one-liner which is equivalent to what we're doing here for proving for the properties on the audio file. So for Android, on the left here, we're setting up an event handler. It's all the code that we need to do to fire up an event handler. In C#, you just have to do plus is equal and just give it the delegate. Now, as of the latest version of .NET, something called async and await was introduced. It's a helper for us to write asynchronous code. And when we're building mobile applications, we really want to take advantage of the asynchronous and parallel libraries that are available to us. So what we can do is simply append the async keyword to our delegate, and we get a method that has the possibility to run asynchronously. So why do we want to do this in Xamarin? Well, you can write everything in C#. So we just need one language. We just need one team, one language. And of course, we need a lot of devices, but we need that anyways. And Xamarin and Microsoft recently partnered up. So now there's something called from before, there's something called the portable class libraries. These are things that we can share among different devices, but due to some licenses on Microsoft, they were only allowed to be used on Microsoft platforms. So now they've changed that, so we can use this on all the different platforms, which means that we can target 2.5 billion plus devices using C# together with Xamarin. So about that 100% code coverage. Anything you can think about, the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, NFC, whatever you want to do on your device, you can do that through Xamarin and C#. If you can do it in Objective-C and Java, you can do that in C# with Xamarin as well. And the cool thing here is that we really do get native performance. Because what happens is, when you develop iOS devices, Apple has a license that requires you to compile on an Apple or a Mac. So what you need to do is that you of course need to have a Mac, but if you're an iOS developer, you need to do that anyways. So what you do is that you simply tell Visual Studio to compile your thing, it fires that off to your Mac, and then it gives you the binary back, which is pretty slick. So this is compiled down to ahead of time binary, so you can just fire that off to Apple's App Store. The same goes for Android. It compiles this down, so we take advantage of the Android JIT compilation, which means that when you install this on your device, it's going to be optimized for your platform, for the device that is actually installing it. Now you might think to yourself, so if iOS 7 was released tomorrow, how do I know when I can start writing for these features using Xamarin? It's a really good question. So it's always up to date. And until today, they've had same-day support for all the iOS versions. So when iOS 5, 6, 6.1, and 7 was released, the same day Xamarin released support for their libraries. So you could just upgrade your applications directly, which is pretty cool. It's mostly important for the iOS developers, because if you've done Android development before, you know that people really don't upgrade their Android devices as frequently as they would do with an iOS device. So they've got a case study on how much code they could share between the different platforms. We have the red things here, that's the user interface. That's the only thing that we had to redo on each device. It turns out that we could reuse about 90% of the code. And that's pretty significant. Now think about what we're really gaining from this here. We get native performance and we get a native UI. The user is going to get what they expect, and the customer is going to be happy because they get their performance. And the portable class libraries, when we create this in Visual Studio, it's so simple. So we can simply tell this to include Silverlight, Windows Phone, Android, iOS, the Windows Store applications, and the .NET Framework itself. We have two different ways of developing these types of applications. So when we install Xamarin, we get something called Xamarin Studio. It's a new IDE that is optimized for cross-platform development. And we can also use the integration with Visual Studio and write the applications directly in that. And when we are ready to distribute this application, we can just fire off the binaries to all the different stores that we want to do. So we have the App Store, we have Google Play, we have the Windows Store, we have Windows Phone Store, and the other two there. And the Visual Studio integration comes with a lot of different things. So for instance, I have one solution for all the different projects. I create my iOS, Android, Windows Phone, and Windows Store application in one solution. They're different projects, but it's still much easier for me to share things between them. And when developing this in Visual Studio, we can leverage from the entire Microsoft ecosystem. So if you've used Visual Studio before, you know how extensible that is. We can have things like ReSharper, we have connections with TFS, and we have a lot of different tools to handle quality of our code. Now, Xamarin Studio looks fairly similar to any other IDE that you might have seen out there. It's optimized for cross-platform development. You can use it to explore the native APIs. It comes with really good user interface designers. So about that designer, there's actually an Android designer in Visual Studio as well. So when you install Xamarin, you get this in Visual Studio. You can just drag and drop your UI as you would if you worked in a different Android development IDE. And this is available both in Visual Studio and Xamarin Studio. And what you can do here is that you can target the different screen sizes. You can target different devices and see how it's going to look on these here. So I can simply click a drop down and see what is this going to look like on, for instance, the new Nexus or an older version of Android. And it all saves to the standard Android XML. So we have something called the iOS designer as well. It's pretty similar to the Android one, but it's of course targeted to iOS. It's only available in Xamarin Studio for now. It's coming support to Visual Studio pretty soon. So if you do iOS and Android on the same computer, you still need both the development environments. And I think it works pretty good. So we have something called the Xamarin Component Store. So imagine that you want to have something for creating signatures in your application. You want to have a sign-off on the thing that you're doing. I was thinking that I wanted to create a diving application because I recently started diving a lot. And what I want to do is that I want to have my dive buddy to sign off when we visit a new dive site and dive there. But normally they're used to having this paper that everyone sign on. So what I could do is that I can go into the Xamarin Component Store and just purchase something that helps me with the signatures. And this is pretty awesome. This means that I don't have to build that myself. This creates really rapid development. So I can just go to the component store and look up everything that I might need in my application and simply just install that and use these libraries. If you're familiar with things like NuGet, it's pretty much like that. So we just install packages into our solution. All right, so if you want to learn more about this, you can visit something called the Xamarin University. You can take certifications on this here. You can learn about a lot of different things. They have live lessons and they have recorded lessons. And after you've taken these lessons, you can go on and take a certification and become a Xamarin certified developer. And I also have another talk called Cross-Platform Development using C# and Xamarin Studio. I'm going to go into more details on how to create an end-to-end application, how to target both Android and Windows Phone using the same solution. And you have the URL there if you want to go and register. And just ping me if you have any questions. And I'll also be taking questions now, if you're wondering anything. Sure.
How much do those components cost? What's the range?
How much does the component cost? It's different. So you can set your own price. If you create a component, you can set your own price. Okay. There are things that are free, like JSON parsers, and the signature pad, I think that costs around $600. So you have to weigh that in. If I had to create this myself, it's probably going to take more time than what $600 would be worth. Yeah.
What would be a good test strategy for doing like iOS and Windows in the same environment? Obviously, we're doing iOS, we just use an emulator, or how would we do
a good test strategy? So you mean like when you're testing these locally on your machine? Right. It's a very good question. So it actually comes with, if you install the Android SDK, you get the Android emulator, and this fires up right into that. So it installs the application, and it hooks up the debugger, so you can follow along with that. So it has full debugging support. And the same goes for Windows Phone. So you can install the Windows Phone 8 SDK, and you get an emulator. And one thing that is pretty cool, so let's say that you use your Mac to build this application. Now, you're doing this in native Mac, so you emulate Windows. Now, from Xamarin Studio, you can just debug your iOS applications. And that's pretty cool. And you can debug your Android stuff as well. Now, if you swap this over, so let's say that you run Windows on your Macintosh instead, and then you emulate iOS. I don't know really how that works, but let's say that you do that, or you use the built-in debugging functionality that comes with the integration with Visual Studio. Now, this connects to a Macintosh using Xcode, runs the application on the Macintosh, and you can debug this over the wire, or if it's running locally. And I think that's pretty amazing. It's a way for them to work around the licensing issues with Apple. But once that, if they fix that in the future, I think it's going to be much easier to do this on different platforms as well. More questions? Have anyone seen Xamarin before? All right. One person? All right. Will you take a look at this later on? Looks pretty interesting. I mean, if you just want to invest some time in learning C#, if you already know Java, it's going to be quite easy to quite easy transition over to C#. And once you know that, you can just start developing applications. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that Xamarin University thing? Like, how extensive is it?
How extensive the Xamarin University is? I'm currently going through all the courses myself to become certified, and they have really good tutorials on every step. So the first one is talking about how can I start creating my own applications using Android? How do I get familiar with the development environments that I need to know? And they do this for both Android and iOS. And there's a fee to this, of course. As it's called university, there's a scholar fee, sort of. And they really do go through everything that you need to know to become a really good mobile developer using their platforms. So they're going to teach you everything about different views, how do you transition between different views, how do you populate list stuff, how do you work with, I don't know, web stuff, all the stuff that you need to know to create a rich client for each mobile device. Does that answer the question? I really recommend going online and check what kind of courses do they have, what kind of content do they distribute, because it's really, it's formatted after what the developers need to know to create applications. Sort of what the business wants the developers to know when they develop applications. Yep.
How mature is Xamarin? How long has it been going for now?
How long Xamarin has been out there?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure, actually. We've had yeah.
The first incarnation is actually about 10 years old. It's based on the Mono project, and they've been through quite a few different stages of ownership. So they were, at one point they were bought out by Novell, and then Novell sacked them all and shut down the department. They went quiet for about 3 months, and then they all appeared as Xamarin with venture capital funding. So Xamarin themselves have been there for 2 or 3 years, I think. Yep. But overall, the same key people, the same fundamental technology has been around for about 10 years.
Yeah, so Mono is pretty old. I mean, Mono's been developing. Mono is like the runtime, the .NET runtime, but it works on different platforms. So they have their own implementation of .NET. That is what makes it work on the different platforms. And as aside from this, if you've seen something called XNA before, you can create games using this. It's like a managed framework for DirectX. It's canceled now, but there's something called, oh no, I forgot the name. It's like a Mono version for Monogame. Sorry, it's called Monogame. You can create your games using this. If you want to create 2D games or 3D games, you can use Monogame, which just hooks into all this. So it makes it really easy to create games as well. Yep.
So one more, as a Mac user, I've wanted to make some Windows 8 Metro UI apps previously. Can I use the IDE? Does it have Metro included?
Does Xamarin Studio have modern UI support?
The Metro UI.
The modern UI?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't say Metro. Yeah.
You can.
I can, yeah. No, you can't create Metro applications using, or Windows Store applications using Xamarin Studio. Yeah, it would be pretty cool, but you have Visual Studio for that. So if you really want to create that, you should just use Parallels or Bootcamp. Any other questions? So how many of you have published applications for different platforms? All right, that's pretty cool. Is it mostly iOS or Android? All right. Phone gap. Yeah, I heard someone talking about that before. It seems that they're doing their own thing with going with the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript approach, but it still compiles sort of to native. I'm guessing in their cloud, it's all very magic. It's sort of magic when it comes to Xamarin as well, but they try to be transparent. So if you're coming from a iOS or Android development background, you're really going to find yourself very familiar with the API. So everything has the same names. I don't know all the names in iOS, but if you can come up with something, it's most likely called the same thing using the Xamarin libraries. And that's pretty powerful. So if you transition into a new language like C# coming from Objective-C, it would be pretty hard if you need to transition into a new API as well. So it's pretty easy to transition into that. All right, if there's no more questions, I'm done. Thank you so much for having me.